welcome. I'm here to welcome you to this space. My name is W.E.B Du Baptiste. I am the director of the W.E.B Du Bois Center here at UMass. This is where we are standing. We are very happy and honored to have you all here for this celebration of the life of Tiyo. I think it's important. I'm hoping that if it's your first time here, it won't be your last time here. This is a space that highlights the legacy and the work of W.E.B Du Bois beyond just the stuff he wrote. So I say that because we are not to be confused with the W.E.B Du Bois Library, even though we're in it. And we're not to be confused with the W.E.B Du Bois Department of Afro-American Studies, which is at New Africa House, which is across campus. Or to be confused with the W.E.B Du Bois Papers, which are 3 stories above us. However, what I'm saying over and over and over again is that we are, I'm probably going to coin a new term now, we are kind of the cultural ambassadors at this point of spreading the work and the words and the wisdom of Du Bois in the world. And by saying that is because in places like Germany and Russia and China and Ghana, Du Bois is known and understood much more than he is or has been for many, many years in his own, the place of his birth. And that is a sad statement because he is one of the most profound and amazing scholars of the 20th century. The fact that we can pick a Du Bois quote and relate it to anything that's happening today is both profound and sad at the same time. And so I think that with saying that, I think that this is the place to celebrate the life of someone who wanted his work and his words to be in the world. So I'm excited that we connected, Lois and I connected and made this happen, and we hope that you reach out to us as a Du Bois Center as a place for events and a place to gather and learn not just about Du Bois, about the work of social transformation, because we need it really badly right now. So thank you and welcome, and I'm going to introduce Tiyo's friend, Lois Ahrens, and that's what I was told to introduce her as, and I gave her an entire bio. So, here she is.
Thank you, everybody. I'm really glad to see you here. I'm glad that first we wanted ambient music. Now we don't want ambient music. This is the way it is. I'm really glad to see everybody here. So thank you for coming. Thinking about this event and doing this, the feeling that I have of being here is that I am 100% sure that Tiyo is with us here right now. Absolutely sure that he's here with us. I have a bunch of thank yous. Thank you to Dr. W.E.B Du Baptiste for inviting us here to have the celebration at the Du Bois Center. In 2006, when Rob Cox agreed to have Tiyo's papers at special collections, I told Tiyo that the name of the library that it was in was the W.E.B Du Bois Library, and I sent him a picture of the library and the plaque. And he was so happy to have his papers here in a library honoring Du Bois. I know that Tiyo would be really thrilled that we were celebrating him in this place, in the Du Bois Center. I mean, so it's very, very meaningful that we're here, and I know it would be to Tiyo. There are a lot of people here to thank. I want to thank Caroline White, who became one of Tiyo's correspondents after curating an exhibit at the library here in 2014, and Tiyo was featured in that. And Caroline also put together this slideshow. And thanks to Amherst Media for being here. And I also have to thank Andrea Battle, who first suggested to me that Whitney might be interested in sponsoring this event, and she was right, and then Whitney jumped in. I also have to thank Rob Cox, who in 2006 agreed to have Tiyo's papers in special collections. And it was
GPS signal lost.
Sorry.
it was a stroke of good fortune just at that time that 3 or 4 big boxes of papers arrived from Tiyo's friend Howard Zinn. And just at that moment, pretty much, Aaron Rubenstein began his internship at Special Collections. And I think he thought he was going to take a couple of months to go through Tiyo's papers, and it ended up taking a year to write the finding aid and to create the web page for Tiyo, which is on the Special Collections website, which if you've never seen it, I encourage you to look at it. Today, many of us brought more of Tiyo's papers to add to the archive. There's a couple of boxes right there. These were materials that were in Tiyo's cage, which is what he always called it, when he passed away on June 8th. Last week would have been Tiyo's 86th birthday. I first met Tiyo in 2005 at the suggestion of Peter Wagner, who some of you might know, suggested that I send Tiyo a set of Real Cost of Prisons comic books, which I had just published. And so I did. And so, of course, immediately Tiyo wrote back. And so from then until when Tiyo passed away, I think a week didn't go by when we didn't have a letter or something going one way or the other for all of these years. So it's been a lot of paper going back and forth. Our letters were about everything, about the work that he was doing and the work that he was committed to, about my work, about politics, about his treatment at Dallas, which is the name of the prison that he was in, about his health, about the passing of his sister Betty, and there are pictures of her in the slideshow, about Howard's passing, and then also just recently, or not that recently, about the passing of Phil Africa, who was one of the people that really helped he and his brother Del take care of Tiyo toward the end. And during the last few months especially, we spent, a number of us did, a lot of time trying to figure out how we could get a commutation for Tiyo. And of course that didn't happen, and I don't know how long he would have lived really, or could have lived for that to happen in the state of Pennsylvania. Despite spending more than 50 years in prisons and jails in Pennsylvania, including 40 years at Dallas, Tiyo led a life that was filled with accomplishments. He had a great spirit and a great zest for life, a love of people, a love of ideas, a love of music. He was a jazz musician, a teacher, and a published writer of political and scholarly work. And hopefully you'll hear more about that when other people speak about some of his work. I hope that for those of you who are here tonight who didn't know him, you'll get just a little idea of what a really remarkable person he was, and was able to do these things in a system that basically did everything that it possibly could to make sure, or to try to make sure they didn't succeed, that he wasn't a person of the accomplishments that he is. So they didn't succeed, and that was really, I mean, one of Tiyo's victories, I think. I think he knew that was one of his victories, I think. There are many people that couldn't be here tonight. One person I want to mention is Paul Allen Smith, also known to many of us as Pablo. Pablo was Howard Zinn's good friend, and he was Howard's Hollywood agent. And he became Tiyo's good friend and financial supporter and a bawdy, rabble-rousing correspondent. Paul and Tiyo exchanged, like many of us, thousands of letters. I'm really sorry that Paul couldn't be here. He's a Hollywood agent that lives in Hollywood. Anyway, so he couldn't make it here. In 1978, Tiyo began work on a self-directed bachelor's degree in African American history through the Prison Education Project, hosted by Beacon College and run by Monty Neal. Although Tiyo's work and materials were often destroyed by guards, he completed his degree and he immediately began his master's degree in political science. After he earned his master's degree in 1983, he was promoted to be the director of the Prison Education Project. Through Beacon College, Tiyo became a student and then a lifelong friend of Howard Zinn and Howard's wife, Rosalind. His friendship with Monty continued until Tiyo's death, and so I'm pleased to introduce Monty.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's nice to see a wonderful turnout to honor my beloved Tiyo. And thank you to the Du Bois Center, because I think it's appropriate and wonderful that his papers would be here. So I met Tiyo in 1977 when he applied to the Prisoner Education Project, which was a correspondence program that I co-founded and then directed. First out of Franconia College, then out of Beacon College. And in fact, no sooner had we accepted him than Franconia went under. So I was able to move it to Beacon, and Tiyo started his work in 1978, as Lois said. And he earned a bachelor's and then a master's degree. And like a few of the other prisoners, we became personal correspondents, not just doing the work, which was often the case. But Tiyo was the only one that persisted. Partly, I mean, some of the others got released, and who knows, but he persisted, and I persisted, and we maintained this 40-year correspondence, and much of it is in the archives here. When he began, Tiyo was a really rather angry man. He wanted to fight every battle. He was justifiably, constantly infuriated by the racism, the insults, the degradations, and dehumanization that prisons inflict on prisoners 24 hours a day. But what he learned over time was to channel his rage, to become strategic, and in a sense keep his eyes on the prize. And I think Tiyo had a few prizes that he kept his eyes on. One of them was he hated the capitalist system and wanted to overcome it. He was locked in prison and he's trying to figure out, what do I do? What's my role in this social justice war? And his goals were about helping other prisoners survive and improve their situation in prison and be better prepared should they be released. And then doing what he could do to abolish prisons. So he took on numerous projects. He played on and coached football teams year after year for several decades. He formed and led bands, jazz bands and other music that would perform on occasion in the prison. When he saw how inadequate the prison GED program was, he started his own. He gathered free materials and began working with a group of prisoners. Some of them got their GEDs, others made progress toward it, and he certainly had more success than the prison program did. He found he couldn't sustain that with no resources and the constant trouble with the guards. But many people benefited from Tiyo's work. And that he could do all these things while he read extensively, while he corresponded, as you've probably gotten the point, with thousands and thousands of letters over the years to many different people. Practicing his saxophone, writing music, some of the charts were up there in the slideshow, and intervening regularly to help other prisoners. It's really, I'm just amazed how much he did in those difficult circumstances. He launched the Coalition for the Abolition of Prisons, CAP, as an organization and as a publication, done from inside. He wrote articles for several journals and book chapters that Mecca will talk about and others. He really hoped to find outside support and to build a network that CAP could be a kind of real social force. But, you know, all of his allies, like us, we've got our own lives and projects, and it didn't work in that sense, but, you know, he advanced our thinking. He put ideas on the table. He connected people to each other. I mean, I know a bunch of people that I would never have known had it not been for Tiyo. Tiyo pushed the boundaries and often exceeded by far the limits that he faced. And then he was simply a loving friend. He cared about my wife Shelley, who couldn't be here today. He would ask about my son Damien and his 3 children, and I'd send him pictures of us all, and he said he would put them on the wall of his cell and talk to us every day. And I know that over the years, many of us had similar relationships with Tiyo. I too want to mention the great Howard Zinn. I approached Howard to see if he'd be Tiyo's evaluator on a project as he worked toward his master's, and Howard, you know, God only knows how many things on his plate, said yes, being an incredibly generous man, and turned into another one of Tiyo's lifelong correspondence, 4 boxes. I didn't know how many, but 4 boxes. And, you know, that Howard got his brother to publish Tiyo's autobiography, which is still available on, at least on Amazon. He also introduced Tiyo to Paul Allen Smith, Pablo, whom Lois just mentioned. And, you know, Pablo and Lois and Erica and Mecca, we were there along with a few other people who couldn't be here today, really all the time for Tiyo. But he was there for us also. It wasn't a one-way street of us supporting Tiyo. It was wonderful to get letters from Tiyo, even in pain that some, you know, I couldn't cure. He was in prison. He was getting old. He died in prison. I mean, he should have been out years and years and years before for whatever he did. But, you know, he would, you know, we'd go on vacation. He'd be so happy we were on vacation. He wished he could be stashed in our suitcase. But, you know, he was always wanting those photographs and that conversation. And so the range was from the really political to the deeply personal. And he took pleasure in our pleasure and pain from our pains, as we did in his case. And so that's to say he was my brother as well as a comrade, and I loved him all the time for decades. And I love him still, and I miss him. Thank you.
Relative to half the people in this room, I've known Tiyo less time and less well than other people. I was correspondent, but not on the scale of thousands and thousands of letters. But I do want to pick up on a couple of things. I think Lois pointed out that Tiyo would have loved to be in a library named after W.E.B Du Bois. And I hope Whitney will back me on this, but I think Du Bois would have loved to have Tiyo in his own library. And I think it's easy to see when you look at what we've been hearing from Ani and what we'll surely hear from everyone else. And that is, most of the activists that we talk to, the key is that 90% of your success is showing up. And Tiyo never had the opportunity to show up for 40 years. And yet we're talking about building networks of people, thousands of letters across the country, to one after another, who are then meeting other people through Tiyo indirectly. All from a walled cell in the middle of Pennsylvania in a godforsaken place in Pennsylvania. Pardon me for saying that, but it really is. I've been there. But Tiyo really had a way in his writing, in his interactions with people directly and indirectly, of bringing people together. And if there's anything that gives me some optimism in a time when my naturally pessimistic tendencies tend towards real despair, like in the last, what would be 12 or 13 months, how long has it been? I don't know, far too long. It's thinking that a guy who dies in prison has brought together the people in this room and as many more who touch people through this room. And we can thank Tiyo for that, and I hope we'll continue to thank Tiyo for that. His vision, his intellect, his ability to write and ability to connect are really unparalleled in our collections here. And it's wonderful to see. For us personally, in the archives here, it's meant opening doors and opening a way of thinking about the people who accomplish social change. We think about the activists who go out all the time, but Tiyo has really turned it around for us to think about the people who themselves are speaking about their own imprisonment, about their own experiences behind bars and in the system, whether it's behind bars or formerly behind bars. And it's really opened up new areas where we can hear people speaking about the experiences that are not spoken about nearly enough in public. And that's all due to Tiyo. And I'm hoping we can lay a foundation so that a much larger group of people can continue to connect with you and all the people who are not present in this room. So I want to thank Tiyo, and I think W.E.B Du Bois would thank Tiyo for all of that, because the visions are very similar in many ways. So with that, I guess my turn is to introduce Erica Arthur, who's a long-term correspondent of Tiyo's, and as it turns out, as a percentage of life, may actually know Tiyo longer than anyone in this room, because she mentions that as a young child she ran wild through the woods on the other side of the wall in which Tiyo was inside. So here's Erica.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here today to honor the life of our remarkable friend Tiyo. Yeah, it's true, I grew up very close to the prison in which Tiyo was caged for all those years, and we were in the same place at the same time, but living obviously very different lives. And so when Lois and I knew each other from various different connections in the Valley, and so when I heard that Lois was writing with someone at SEI Dallas, I was moved because I could see the lights of that prison from a house that I lived in 8th grade. So once I started writing with Tiyo, and I learned about his life behind bars and all that he had been doing all that time that I was running around in the woods so close. I was just kind of blown away by that kind of spatial, the way that we our lives had touched in a way already. And then he proceeded very quickly to touch my heart with the effusive love that is just apparent from him so quickly when you are given the privilege to know him. So I started writing with him, and like so many others, it didn't take long to be exchanging a letter a week, you know. And I, for various reasons, lived in about 20 different places when I lived in the Valley, 20 different places in about 15 years. And, you know, I was going through my letters, and each letter would be like, Tiyo, you're not going to believe it, but I have a new address. And he would, you know, he would write to me at that new address. And we wrote all those years, and you know, I won't repeat all of the things that I've heard others say, and which resonate from my relationship with him as well. But I will say that what I'm left with, it really is that Tiyo developed a resilience and a skill for resourcing himself from his friends and his supporters, dead and alive, his sister, his mentors and teachers and comrades, you know, and he had an embodied way of drawing that energy. He was denied the dignity of human touch. He couldn't hug or shake hands with or lay eyes on even these people who resource his spirit and his politics and his intellect. But he, and going through this last round of papers from his cell, just drove this home, he wrote list after list after list of his friends' names. Each one might have been a little different because he might have gotten a letter from somebody just now, and so they made it onto this list, and then the next list might be, you know, a dozen people with like 2 different names or whatever. But you know, I know that he was writing that as an embodied form of resistance and resourcing himself. And he would touch those lists, and he would touch the photos and talk to them. As he said so many times, I touch and talk to your pictures every day. And you know, I felt privileged to be among that list of people because, as was said, it was a mutual support and a mutual love. And I think he demonstrated what we all need so terribly right now, which is to find that love and connection even in the darkest days. You know, he was in the darkest days, in the darkest place that we can really imagine for half a century. And so if he could do it, then I have to say I can do it. So I won't go on and on, but I do want to bring some music into the room because we didn't get the privilege of hearing his music. If you can pass this around and if you'll humor me. And this song, when I heard that Tiyo was in his last days, I got in the car and drove toward his cage. And this song came into my mind, and so while I was driving what turned out to be 8 hours, which should have been only 6, but traffic was really bad, so I actually didn't make it there in time to get inside to hold his hand at the end of his life. But I was singing this song on the way down, and it just seemed really fitting for him. So I'm a little nervous, and I have a cold, and I don't know how many of you read music or can follow along, but if you are so inclined. This is a song that I sing in a hospice choir to people at the last moments of their lives, and I wanted to dedicate it to Tiyo today. So I'll just sing it real quick for you, and then we can maybe do it together. So it goes, let the life I've lived speak for me. Let the life I've lived speak for me. When I come to the end of this road, and I lay down my heavy load, let the life I lived speak for me. Friends I've made, let the friends I've made speak for me.
Thank you, Louis, for pulling us all together, because we've been for so long in this community, this cherished community, not being face to face, right, ourselves, right, and then meeting at the Mount Holyoke Range at Skinner Park this afternoon. It was immediately clear who I should be talking to, right. These are no longer strangers, Erica and Monty, right, and Julian joining us, my partner Philip. So it was beautiful to do a Tiyo Presente, right? At the mountain, a mountain that for me as a graduate student here meant so much for me to go up there, right? And for Tiyo's spirit, this remains to be dispersed there, and to see the Du Bois Library from the mountaintop, right? And I had a student yesterday who said, well, I had to rehearse and present I Have a Dream speech by Dr. King, right? And in kindergarten, right? I was like, well, I want to see the evidence, right? And it's so beautiful. And he shared, obviously, for his presentation in my peace class, the video of Dr. King speaking. And so for me, the spirit came, it was Tiyo saying, "Free at last," right? And I also feel Tiyo's spirit here, right with us. Couldn't be with us today is Professor Joanne James, who is also found Tiyo's writing very remarkable. You may have seen her work in prison, publishing in Prison Intellectuals. So seeing the formidable spirit of Tiyo, trained by Monty and cadre of his friends, and championed by Howard Zinn and many others. And so that gave him a really significant forum, right, to connect with the worldwide prison abolitionist movement, and then the penal abolitionist movement. And I learned about ICOPA through Tiyo, the International Conference on Penal Abolition. We presented his letters from prison at the conferences wherever they were, in Lagos, Nigeria, or London, or Ottawa, right, Toronto. And so he was always with us at those forums for organizing for change, right? And again, remarkable, for an intellectual like me, who's like, I have ample opportunity to meet and to know, and still to this date, ICOPA is very significant for me, where I saw Angela Davis really come out as an abolitionist in 2000, when she wasn't really that clear prior to that, right? So I met Tiyo when I came, I got my job at SUNY Cortland in 1999, and it was Elizabeth Quigley who introduced me to his newsletter, the Coalition for the Abolition of Prisons, right, CAP. And Elizabeth was tabling at a Black Philosophers Conference. So you see, Tiyo was everywhere. There were good hearts, and social justice, and so that's sparked this conversation. And so I found this early letter in preparation, going through my archives again, from December 1999, right, where he says, "Hi Mecca, here's some materials from the former Pennsylvania Attorney General," right? He was also in touch with the powers that be, right? And, to be talking about Mumia and report on the myth of humane imprisonment, right? And of course, there's the still struggling Tiyo emblem that you're all familiar with, right? And then, as Monty alluded to, the signs of repression and what he did. This is 1999, right? So I wanted to share with you Tiyo's voice here. Last night, he writes, at about 8 p.m., 2 guards came to this cage, cuffed me to the bars, then proceeded to again trash my books, papers, pictures, etc. It's the regular form of harassment. They became upset because I refused to become upset. In my view, maturity is the ability to control anger and settle differences without violence and destruction. And then very emphatically he writes, "I appreciate every day that I'm alive and the gift of life." You see, Monty, this is one paragraph. Then the next paragraph says, "It's Messiah time." It's like change of pace. Like, this is pretty dramatic what you just described. And your sort of, very Buddhist way of channeling anger and seeing repression, noting it as repression, and then not having them moving your own spirit, being really very much in control of your own spirit, right? And so in the last paragraph, "I wish you well and your family, it's all fine, and, you're playing some music, whatever you do, you're the best, and, just always pampering me." It was all about make it just continue that path of activism that I started here, by the way, at UMass. We started a union here of graduate students outside the law, right here. He prevailed. I lost my job. I went to women's studies, philosophy and those things. It's all good. But here's another letter, just briefly, from Howard Zinn. Howard presented, right? And he says, well, you know, Tiyo, this is in 2009 in September, he says, I have a long list of grievances, you know, loss of hearing, poor vision, can't walk far, can't stand low. But like you, I am looking at the positive side of things. You're a good model for me, because after all, your situation is a lot more repressive than mine, and yet you maintain a wonderful spirit. So many people can learn from that, right? And here Howard says, when I hear you say that you don't know how much longer you will be on this earth, I understand. I just turned 87, and I feel I don't have much to go. But I don't feel bad about it. Since Roz died, I have been philosophical as she was, and as you are, about coming to the end, because the important thing is that you have lived a good life. In your case, you have done amazing things from the confines of your imprisonment. You have organized a movement for the abolition of prisons. You have had your ideas spread across the nation and across the globe. You had contributed to the education of your fellow prisoners in a very practical way. You have inspired countless people by your example of what one person can do against enormous odds. So when you leave this earth, you know you will have contributed to the moral development of future generations. And you have made so many good friends who are devoted to you and love you. That is a legacy that very few people, whatever prestige and wealth they have accumulated, can match. This is Howard, right? And I welcome you now all in this community, this loving community, this Ubuntu community of Tiyo and Howard and all of us. And thank you, Louis. And Tiyo presente.
Tiyo presente. Thank you. Thanks to everybody. I think that this archive that's here at Special Collections is not the only, one of the only archives of a politicized prisoner, a full life. I mean, if you look at, starting with Tiyo's early family pictures and up until now. I mean, I haven't brought them yet, but I have all the papers that we worked on for his commutation. So from the beginning to the end, and now this is part of the archive. It's being taped. And I think that there are very, very few complete archives. I mean, Tiyo wasn't a famous prisoner. He isn't Mumia. He's not a political prisoner. He was a politicized prisoner that did political work and did his political work for decades and decades and decades. And so it's a unique resource. And I mean, I always feel like I'm in touch with a lot of people who are incarcerated, and I always feel like there needs to be more places for the legacy of people, many of whom, like in, for example, Massachusetts, who are very old and who also have been doing amazing work for years and years and years. Lifers organizations, for example. There's a fantastic lifers organization in Norfolk Prison. And I don't know what's going to happen, you know, like who has this body of work of decades, not just individuals correspondence, but the organizational correspondence. I mean, I can think of dozens and dozens of examples like this. And it kind of drives me nuts in a way that, you know, like what's going to happen? I mean, I've known other people in prison since that, you know, that have died. And what happens, all of whom are very productive people, what happens to their work, to their legacy, and it's just a big concern of mine. So I just put that out there. As part of that, one of the things that we talked about doing, and I'm going to initiate, is so on Tiyo's page at Special Collections, there's the finding aid, and then there's like a list of all the boxes and what the correspondence is. But there's obviously, I mean, I'm looking at those boxes and there's more that's going to be coming and probably has come since that was first done of Tiyo's papers that haven't been gone through. And there's nothing, I mean, Caroline has these images that are digitized, but many of the letters, the music, all of that isn't there for people to see, to get a sense, a first-hand sense of what his letters are like and what his correspondence has been like, and to put up some music. And hopefully, we were to have a sax player here, but at the last moment that sax player canceled, which is why we don't have a sax player here. But to have some of his music recorded and to have that online so that people can see it. And so I'm here announcing that I am launching a fundraising campaign to raise money to get that material, at least a sample of that material, digitized so that we can put it up. And depending on how much money we raise, that's how much we'll put up. And so I will be in touch with everybody about that. On the invitation that you all got, there is a link to how you can donate online if you want to go to that. But I'll also be in touch with you, and I'll also be asking you to help spread the word, because I really think it's important, not just for Tiyo, not just for special collections, but to create this resource, this knowledge of what incarcerated people, like the breadth and the scope of the lives and the work and the intellect of incarcerated people. We are not meant to know what they think. We are not meant to know who they are. That is what the walls are for. And so we need to do our bit to break down those walls. And this is one way I think we can break down those walls. So I hope that you'll give if you can, and I hope that you'll let people know so that we can raise some money to do that. When Special Collections put this exhibit on that was downstairs in 2014, I was asked to give a talk about Tiyo and also mass incarceration, which I did. And I asked Tiyo to write something for me to read. And so this is what he wrote, or part of what he wrote. To the people attending this event, I ask you to think about and discuss among yourselves the following questions. Why is it that the United States has the highest rate of incarceration of all developed nations? Why are a disproportionate number of poor and people of color in prisons? What should be the perspective on punishment, retribution, restitution, life without parole, known as slow death row, the death penalty, and prison abolition? These were Tiyo's questions then. These were his constant questions, and so I put these questions out to you again in Tiyo's name, ask you to think about them, and so we're at the end of our program. I'm really glad that you're all here. I hope that you'll all talk to all of us that knew Tiyo and loved Tiyo and get an even better sense of what an amazing, remarkable person he was. And so there's dinner in there, and there's actually a place where you can buy a beer or a glass of wine if you want it. And so I hope that everybody enjoys your dinner, and I hope that you connect with friends and old friends and new friends. So thank you for coming.